when I left Apple, there was this thought in the back of my mind that, I think I might make a good coach. That sounds interesting to me. And then I just kind of shelved it. But after I tried all these other things and they hadn't panned out, I came across this coaching program and it felt like, well, here's the last thing on my list. Maybe I should try this.
Hey there, I'm Goli Kalkaran, and this is Lessons from a Quitter, where we believe that it's never too late to start over. No matter how much time or money you've spent getting to where you are, if ultimately you are not happy, then it's time to get out. If you're feeling stuck and you feel like there's gotta be more, there's gotta be a way to feel fulfilled and excited about what you do, then this is the podcast for you. Each week, I will sit down with an inspiring guest who quit their professional career in order to forge their own path and create a life that they love. Hi, welcome to another episode of Lessons from a Quitter. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like the show, the biggest way to support me is to share it. I know you guys have friends who hate their jobs and want to quit as well, and you can help me and help them. Think of what an awesome friend you will be to just quickly text them this podcast. It could help a lot of people and it would help me grow and it would mean the world to me. So go ahead and share it. And if you haven't already left us a review, what are you waiting for? Get on iTunes or Google Play or wherever it is you listen and let me know what you think of the show. Leave an honest review, but only if you give me a 5-star. No, I'm kidding. You can leave an honest review. I love reading them and hearing what you guys think about the show. I'm really excited about today's episode. I have Dona Bumgarner, and she is a life coach, mama maker, and she works primarily with moms who know that there is much more to life than mothering, and they've sort of lost track of what that more is. Life hasn't turned out exactly like they intended, and they're just trying to keep up and keep everything running, and she helps them unearth their passions and figure out, who they truly are and how they can live a bigger life. Now, she started out, like many of us do, climbing that corporate ladder, and she was at Apple for over 11 years and climbed her way into a cushy upper management job, making a great living. And we'll talk all about how her journey went from corporate to going back to get her MBA, where she found out that she was pregnant and she decided ultimately to leave graduate school and really reflect back on what she wanted to do. The reason I really wanted Dona on the show is I think there is a really powerful lesson and topic that I want to highlight. We'll get into how she found this career, all the things that she tried before she got here, and what she went through in her own mothering experience and being a stay-at-home mom, and how that left her depressed and why she wanted more and how she got there. But the main reason, to be honest, why I wanted her on is because she talks about how she intentionally, once she decided to start this business, she intentionally kept it small and only works, less than part-time, 10, 15 hours a week. And I want to make sure that I highlight on this podcast that the goal isn't just to quit so that you can, go on to build an empire or make millions of dollars. That's great. And if that's something you want to do, then you should do that. But one of the reasons I started this podcast is because I think so often we do what we think we're supposed to do or what's expected of us, or we don't really even question it. We put our head down, we follow a path that somebody else has laid out, and then we get to that end result and realize, hey, I don't really like this. And that even happens once you quit. A lot of times people then jump into the next thing that they think they should be doing. Like maybe they start a business and they have to hustle super hard to make it 6 figures in 6 months and be a success or whatever that means. And I really want people to be more intentional about what is it that you want for your own life. Maybe that means being a stay-at-home mom or dad. Maybe that means working part-time. It can mean a million different things. There's so many possibilities out there, and each one of our circumstances are so different that I really want people to take the time to reflect on what is it that I even want? Why am I leaving this job? And what would my ideal life look like? And what I love is that Dona decided that she had the means to not be able to work full-time. She'll talk about how she was able to basically budget and create a way to live where she didn't need to bring in an income. And she decided that it is a goal of hers to be at home with her daughter more. And so she created that life. And I think that's something that we really need to address. Now, a related issue that I know I'm going to get comments about is every time I have somebody on that talks about how, for whatever reason, financially, they were able to either not work or take, a jump. It brings up a lot of issues for people. That's when I tend to get a lot of comments of like, well, yeah, like that's great that they had a spouse that supported them, or that's great they have this financial situation and they didn't have to work. I don't have that, so this doesn't really help me. And while that's true, I don't doubt that that's true, that everybody has a different financial situation and you may have more debt or you may be the sole breadwinner. And by the way, I do try to include all types of stories. So, we had Phil Black on last episode and he was the sole breadwinner when he quit with his wife and twins and moved to San Diego with no plan. I had Isaac Lidsky, who was the sole breadwinner with his triplets and his wife, who decided to leave his multi-six-figure law firm job. I want to show that other people are doing that. But one thing that I want to highlight before we jump in is if that comes up for you, if you start listening for whatever reason, you're listening to a story and you start coming up with an excuse of like, oh, this person could do that because X. Like, I can't do that because I don't have X, Y, or Z. Typically, it's just an excuse to help let yourself off the hook of like, I can't do it because I don't have that. It's a limiting belief. And we all do it. I do it all the time. And I'm just trying to catch myself now. And it's funny because after I got off the interview, after I did the interview with Dona, I was talking to her about it. And I was saying, I know I'm going to get comments of like, oh, well, she can because she has this situation. And she was saying, yeah, that's really funny because I had that come up a lot when I was starting out my business, because at the time when she had her daughter, her and her partner were separated. And she was saying that when she would talk to people who said like, oh, I'm building this business, like, yeah, I have a lot of help. My spouse, takes the kids to school and brings them home or helps around the house. She would quickly go to, oh, well, see, that's why you can do it. Yeah, it would be like, how nice is that you have a spouse that helps you? And the reality is we all have things that are maybe easier in our life and other things that are harder, and things that we have more help with and other things that we don't. And that's a reality. So I'm not trying to say that like she, obviously has this ability to not have to earn her full income from her business. But I know a ton of people who maybe their spouse makes enough that they could live off of that income, or maybe they could have saved tons of money by working years and years and years in high-paying jobs, and they still can't get themselves to quit. So I don't think that in and of itself is enough to like give you this freedom. I think there's so much conditioning and programming that we have that this is just one part of it. But I did want to raise it before we jump into the episode. I think it's something to be aware of. And I think just in general, as future episodes come up too, if you find yourself saying that to yourself, ask why. Like, why is that coming up for me? Why am I writing this person off or saying like, oh yeah, like they had it easy? And I'm telling you, I do this still with this podcast. I'll find myself like seeing a podcaster that has a much bigger show, or, for whatever reason, I think they're more successful at it. And I'll come up with excuses like, oh, they knew this person, or they had this connection, or they have this many followers on Instagram, or whatever it is. And it's not to say that that's not true, but it's really just me trying to make myself feel better as to like why, I'm not at where I want to be or whatever. So I did want to say that before we jump in. Otherwise, I think it's a super helpful episode, and I love her story, and I love just the wisdom that she brings to a lot of the topics that we talk about motherhood and stay-at-home parents and all these other issues that we tend not to talk about. So without further ado, let's jump in and talk to Dona. Hi, Dona. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I am so glad to have you. And I know that we're going to talk about a lot of important topics today, but why don't you start kind of a little ways back and let us know what your career looked like at Apple and what was the impetus of you leaving?
Yeah. So my story does start a little ways back. So I worked at Apple for just a little over a decade. And I started there when I was in my 20s. So, this was really formative years for me. And I came to Apple with an art degree. So I always thought that it was not something that I would do for very long. It was fun. I joined Apple in 1999 when Apple was hiring like crazy. So it wasn't super hard to get a job there right in that moment in time. And I always thought, oh, I'll work there for a while and I'll buy a house and I'll, move on and do something else. And then 11 years later, I was still there. Over the course of that time, I moved through several different departments. I started as a software tester and then I moved into project management. And by the time I left, I was running a team of project managers. And I was, frankly, burnt out on the whole thing by the time I was done. And I left for two reasons. I left because I wanted to go back to grad school because I had come in with an art degree. I didn't come in with a technical degree. I didn't come in with a business degree. And I felt like I had been outclassed by all the other managers, or I was outclassed by all the other managers around me. And I just thought that if I went and got a business degree, then I would be on a more level playing field. And I really believed that that was true. So I said, I'm going to go do that. And then I'll come back maybe to Apple, maybe a different department, and we'll just see what happens. So I gave my notice. And then between the time when I gave my notice several months in advance and the time when I actually left, I found out I was pregnant with an unexpected baby.
Oh.
So I did start grad school and then I had my daughter. And then after really only one semester of grad school, I realized I really didn't ever want to go back to corporate work. So there I was, with a new baby and having quit my career and no real plan.
Yeah.
No real plan B.
Well, there is so much to get into, but there's a lot of things I actually want to touch on up until this point. I know you said that you really felt like you needed that degree, but now looking back, do you really think that that is what you needed, or you had created kind of like the story that you weren't as good as these other people that had these degrees? Because I see this a lot on the podcast and a lot of people that, especially in the traditional fields, you feel this like imposter syndrome that we all have. But a lot of times we feel like if we get that piece of paper or a degree, like that somehow will prepare us.
Right. That'll legitimize us and somehow. Yeah, I think in retrospect, I'm actually really not sure. And I was still getting promoted. I mean, it wasn't like I had plateaued and I was getting turned down for promotions or anything. And in fact, when I told my direct manager, who was a vice president, that I wanted to go get a business degree, he said, I don't have a business degree. Why do you want to go get a business degree?
Right.
So I'm not sure that it would have really made any difference. I think that for me, in my head, it would have made a difference. It would have given me more confidence. So in that sense, it would have made a difference. But in terms of would I have done better at Apple, or would I have had a different job or been promoted to vice president or executive? I don't know that it would have. No.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, I know because I've talked to a lot of people that have done that and thought that. And then even when they got it, maybe it gave them a little boost of confidence, but even that doesn't. Like, like for me, when I went to law school, most lawyers, you think going in, I'm going to come out and I'm going to know what I'm doing. And you come out and you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And so a lot of times I think there is this false sense of like, I will have security, I will have confidence when I get that. And that's not necessarily the case. It's more of these like internal feelings of imposter or like lack of self-confidence that really is the issue that you don't need a degree for.
It turns out really that all degrees are like that, because I can say exactly the same thing of my art degree. I thought that when I finished my art degree, I would know how to get my art into galleries. And guess what? Nope, I didn't.
Right, exactly. So what was the awakening? What was it in business school that kind of got you to think like, I don't ever want to go back to corporate? Something that you hadn't thought before? Like what clicked for you there?
I think it was a number of things. I think it was being surrounded by a bunch of people who were really driven. And some of them were entrepreneurs. They were planning to start their own companies. And some of them were planning to go back into a corporate setting and really change the world. Now, I chose a business program that was sustainability focused. So it was a little bit different than a standard business program. So we were talking a lot about business practices that were going to be more green and really change things.
Right.
And one of the things I realized in that environment was that while I really believe strongly and have a lot of passion about doing things more greenly in the world, being more sustainable in the world, I did not have the drive to start a business over it or to get a job in a company that didn't really think that what I was doing was valuable. I just didn't have it. And as you know, that first semester I was in school, I was pregnant. My baby wasn't born yet. I was still pregnant, but I was realizing that all of my attention was turning inward and that I really was feeling, I don't know, this is kind of a weird way to put it, but sort of feeling called to make my life much smaller. And I really just had a sense that I could make an impact in a different way. I could make an impact in my own community, in my own life, in the way that I raised my child, in the way that I ran my household, that all those things that I was really passionate about, I could still be passionate about in a small way in that season, and that it could wait if I wanted to do something bigger, but I just didn't want to do it in that big way.
It comes up again and again on this podcast, and it clearly is a theme in a lot of people's lives, obviously predominantly, I think, women, where once you are pregnant with your first child or you have your first child, it is just a huge shift in your life because, everything is obviously going to change. And so clearly like your priorities and stuff also have to change. And that is a really big like inflection point for people of deciding what they do want to do and what they don't. And so we hear that a lot. So you have these kind of inklings of how you want to change your life, but you were saying like, you have your baby and you don't really have a direction. So what did you do next?
Well, I quit grad school. That was the first thing I did. And I kind of looked at the numbers. I mean, that was part of how I came to that decision. I was like, well, I could continue grad school and that's going to cost like whatever it was going to cost, $40,000 to finish this degree that I'm not sure I'm ever going to use. Or I could live on that money for a while until I figure out what I want to do next. So I kind of just bought myself some time. I had already saved up money to not work for the 2 years I thought I was going to be in grad school. So I already had that.
Oh, okay.
And then I had the money I was going to spend on my degree. So that bought me a bit longer, So I was like, okay, how long can I not work? Let's see how long we can do this. I really just didn't do anything for a while except become a mom. And that was such a surprise to me because, I'd come from this high power position where I really, really loved my work. I really loved the impact I was having. I loved the interaction with other people. And then I was home with a baby by myself all the time.
Yeah.
And there were parts of that I loved, and there were other parts that made me absolutely insane. And I didn't sort that out for quite a while after that, but I just committed myself to it. And I think, looking back on it now, I think that I had bought into the whole idea of when you're a mom, when you're a stay-at-home mom, you have to do it perfectly. You have to do it so good. And I had this feeling like, well, I quit my job to do this, so I better be the best mom there ever was, know? And I was really good at my job, so I figured I could be really good at being a mom too. So I just put my all into it. And it took me a couple years. I don't think I had postpartum depression, but I was depressed because I had created a life. I'd gone from a life that was pretty big to a life that was really tiny. And it was not good for me. It was not good at all. And it took me a long time to figure it out.
I think that is such an important topic to talk about. And I don't think it gets enough coverage because I feel like the discussions in society is like about being a working mom and being like in a high power position. And so many people feel so much guilt leaving that because they've climbed the corporate ladder. And there's, a lot that goes with that. And then the other aspect is like being a stay-at-home mom and a lot of things that go into that. But I don't know whether it's the shame, like a lot of times moms, I felt the same way. I felt like literally what you're saying sounds exactly like me. And I know there are tons of women, I would say a majority of women, who feel in this like middle ground where you do want a life that allows you to be around your children. You do want to not have this corporate life where it's stress and long hours and stuff. But also being a stay-at-home mom doesn't feel right. You want something in addition to that. And I feel like there is this guilt, especially if you've chosen it. It's like, well, I chose to leave my job, so I better make this work and be the best and be happy about it. And you kind of pour it inward instead of saying like, okay, like that didn't work, but this also isn't working for me. And I felt the same way. I felt super depressed about it. And I felt very lost because I was like, I don't want to go back to law. I don't want to be a lawyer, but I also don't want this. And so where does that leave me?
Yeah. So what I fell back on is I knew I wanted to be at home. So that part I knew was true. I did want to be with my daughter as much as I could be, but also I needed to feed my brain. That was the thing that was really clear to me. Like I need to not be at home with a toddler all day long because I need people to talk to. I need to think about ideas. For me, it's always been about bringing change into the world. And I knew I didn't have the passion to be an activist like I thought I did. then it became, how can I build a small business that will give me that outlet, but still allow me to be really present for my daughter? So I tried some things. I mean, that was kind of what I did, is I just experimented. So I tried freelance writing, and that was fun, but it's an awful lot of work and it's not a lot of pay. And I was like, well, it's not really efficient. I went back to my old project management training. That's not a very efficient career. So let's not do that one. I did some VA work, and that was interesting and it paid better, but I decided I really didn't like being the person that somebody else bossed around. I'd rather be the boss. So that didn't last very long. And then I think I taught some crafting classes, which was really just a fun outlet. And then I was like, well, now I'm out of ideas. I don't really know what to do next.
And I'm spent.
And I'm almost out of money, and I'm going to have to figure something out pretty soon here. What happened at that point is I came across a coaching program. And when I left Apple, there was this thought in the back of my mind that, I think I might make a good coach. That sounds interesting to me. And then I just kind of shelved it. But after I tried all these other things and they hadn't panned out, I came across this coaching program, and it felt like, well, here's the last thing on my list. Maybe I should try this. It was a really good fit. It turned out to be a really good fit. And because it was like the management experience I had, and over the course of that time where I was trying to figure it all out, I had started a blog. And so I was writing about being a mindful mom and self-care. And I realized that over those 2.5 years or whatever it was, I had been working out some ideas that became some of the things that I coach around. It was just a really interesting transition, but it was also like the last stop on the train. You know, like if that didn't work, I had no other idea what I was going to do. I mean, I was to the point where I was like, well, maybe I can go work at Starbucks. Right. I think they have pretty good medical coverage. That might be a good idea.
But I think that actually obviously didn't get to that point, but you would have figured something else out. I think the whole point, this is the point of this podcast. And it's funny that you say this because we have had a freelance writer on the show. We have had a professional crafter on the show. We have had, VAs. We've had VAs that have turned into business. And the thing is, and like I say this like a broken record, it's like, you will never know until you try it. We all are like sitting here hoping that we like figure out our path or we just find that dream career. I mean, we've all been already in this position where you thought something was going to be really great and you got there and it wasn't. And that is just the truth about like really anything, I think, in life. And as you evolve and like you keep trying things and you have to be willing to try and put it out there and see like, okay, that wasn't for me. And it's not a reflection on you. I feel like then we like internalize like, well, I didn't make this work either. And look, it's just me and I can't be happy or I'm a failure. Like so dramatic as opposed to like, okay, this doesn't fit my personality either. Well, great. We can check that off the list and move on, you know? And so I love that you did that. And I do love that you came up, finally the last stop was something that you loved. But I do think that is a great piece of like wisdom. The number one thing I hear is, I don't know what I want to do. And it's like, well, you're not going to just figure it out. You have to start doing things.
Try things. Yeah. It's interesting how you say that because I remember having a conversation with a coach that I was working with right around that time, I think just before I found that coaching program. And I was just like crying to her, like, I have tried all these things and none of them work. And I'm such a loser. And what's wrong with me that I can't find a career and I don't know what my passion is and on and on and on. And she was like, hold up. All that means is you've tried a bunch of things and they're not the one yet. Right. So just keep trying things, it doesn't mean anything.
I mean, it's so amazing. Like when you look at kids, like you would think, kids are constantly trying new things and then like they fail and they keep trying or they try something else. And like you would never turn to a child and be like, once they can't put Legos on, like, that's just not for you, or you're a failure. It's like, okay, I'll try it again or do something else. Yet we get so stuck in like our identity and what this means about us. Completely agree. But going to this coaching thing, like when you say that you found this, one of the things that I think, again, going back to imposter syndrome, and so many of us have a lot of these thoughts. I mean, did you ever think, I think a lot of times when I've talked to people about coaching, it's like, well, how can I coach people if I haven't figured out what I want to do? Who am I to tell people what to do?
Yeah, absolutely. That has come up so many times.
And how did you work through that?
Well, usually someone has to talk me down off the ledge, honestly. What I have come to understand, and this is the thing that I'm now better at reminding myself of when my own imposter stuff comes up, is one, the biggest reason that those fears come up is because it's something that you feel really passionate about. So that's a good thing to remind yourself of, is that when those fears come up, it's because you really want that thing.
Yes.
And so I see it as a good thing when that fear comes up for me, even though I have to deal with it again, and it's always like, oh, this again, I have to do this again. But it's a good reminder that, yeah, I'm still really engaged with this work. If I'm feeling like this, it's because it's important to me. So that's a good reminder. And then the second piece is to remember that I only need to be a little further down the path than the people that I'm helping. I don't have to have all the answers. And in fact, one of the ways I've built my business is to be pretty open and vulnerable about the fact that my life is still kind of a mess a lot of the time. I teach a lot of these skills, but that doesn't mean I use them all the time. I forget, and I can write myself faster probably because I know the skills, but that doesn't mean I don't ever need them. I'm still using them all the time myself. So that's the place I have to come back to a lot is like, oh, right, I'm just practicing. I'm just working it a little ahead of the people that I'm teaching. And that's okay, because that's also an inspiring place for me to be for them.
Absolutely.
Because they can see that it's working. They can see that I'm working through it just like they are.
Yeah. And it's a matter of, when I'm a big proponent of coaches, because I just think you're speeding up the learning curve. Like they're showing you all the mistakes they made and they're getting you to a place that you want to be faster than you. And it doesn't mean that they're a perfect person. It's that they've done that journey and they're guiding you and they're a little bit ahead. And that's all you need. It's funny because we don't look at like doctors, like we don't see like, oh, is this doctor eating healthy on their own time? If they're telling me, it's like they know the knowledge and they're telling you what to do. You know, who cares what they're doing?
Yeah.
Or like our therapist or whatnot. So no, I totally agree. Okay. So you find this coaching program and then presumably you obviously go through it.
I went through the program, right?
What does your business look like now? And what have you kind of been doing with it?
Yeah. So it's been about 2 years since I finished the program. I work part-time in my coaching, which was only ever my goal because, I do want to be home with my daughter. She's 8 now, so she's in school. So I have a lot more time than I used to have, but I want to be there with her. I want to take her to activities after school. I want to be really present in her life. I volunteer at her school 1 day a week, and that's the life I really want to have. So I work only part-time, which is really part-time. I really only work about 10, maybe 13 hours a week on my business, which means it's very small. It doesn't make a lot of money. I don't have a ton of clients at a time because I don't have time for a ton of clients at a time. And I don't market enough to get a ton of clients at a time. And it's just me because it's not big enough for me to be able to afford to get any help. So I do everything and it's fine. Like at some point, I would love for it to be a bigger, like I have vision for where I want it to go. But for right now, this is great. This is what I'm happy with. And then the other piece of this is that somewhere along the way there, before I ran out of money, I realized that I had a whole bunch of Apple stock that I converted after I left Apple. So I didn't actually need as much income as I thought I was going to need. So it turns out that we can live, even if I didn't make any money on my business, we could live somewhat comfortably, a little tight, but whatever I can earn makes our life a little bit bigger. We can travel more, we can do more. And I think that that's a really important point because there's something also about moms who stay home who think they can only work if they have to. And I work because I want to, not because I have to. And that has been a really important distinction for me because it's also allowed me to step back from it when I need to. So, for example, 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and I just walked away from my business during the time that I was in treatment. And I had the ability to do that because, I had this financial cushion. But also when I got well again, I sort of looked around and was like, okay, well, what do I want to pick up from my old life? It doesn't have to look like it did before. And I was like, yeah, I really want to do this. I really want this business. It was important to me. So I was able to recommit to it in a way that felt very clean because it didn't feel like I had to. And it just felt like it was something I wanted.
Yeah. Even that is such a great example. A lot of times we always focus on like a barometer of success is, I guess, the amount of money you're making. And that's, programmed in our society for various reasons. But I actually do really love this idea that there are a lot of people who either are stay-at-home moms or dads or, could live off one income or could pare down and live off, like you're saying, you're living off of the stocks that you converted. But a lot of times we're still trained to like always go for the most, right? Build your business as fast as you can and then try to, like, if you can take on more clients.
Right. Build a 6-figure business in 6 months. It's like, that's how it's sold, right?
Exactly. Yeah, everything is about this like arbitrary number of 6 figures. Like why isn't 90,000 as good as 100? Nobody knows. We're going to say 6-figure business and like that's what everybody's going to go after. And I think it's a really not only valuable teaching lesson, but something that we all have to become conscious of. Like, what do I want in my life? Like, how can I facilitate that? Because sometimes maybe it's not making a lot of money. Or maybe in this season of life when your kid is small, it is kind of living on more of a budget and being home more. And then knowing that these seasons change. And maybe when your daughter is older, like you can grow it more, you can put more thing in. And so I think a testament to what you're doing, but also something that I think is a really valuable lesson when people are trying to leave a career is really getting clear on like, what do you want your life to look like? And it doesn't have to, like, I get a lot of people saying like, I can't replace my income. And I'm not saying that it's not important to do that. And sometimes you may need to, but a lot of people I know don't need to replace, like their incomes are very high as doctors or lawyers or whatnot. And it's like, you could live on a lot less and be a lot happier. So why isn't that the goal as opposed to just trying to replace that income?
Right. And that was a lesson I learned when I left Apple, because I had the sense of like, oh my gosh, I'm making so much money at Apple. How am I going to live for 2 years while I'm in grad school with no income? But when I really looked at the numbers, there was so much I was spending that was basically just in support of the job. My commute, I was eating out a lot because I didn't have time to cook. There were so many things I could change that made my budget so dramatically smaller. Which was what made me able to live for basically 5 years without any other income.
Absolutely. That's a good point. Like things that you're doing because of the job. But we've had a couple of episodes with, I don't know if you're familiar with the FIRE movement. It's like financial independence, retire early. It's a whole movement of basically like minimalism and trying to pare down your life. And I really think it has sparked a lot of interest in our audience. Like both those episodes got a ton of feedback because we're, again, just taught to like for more and to have bigger and bigger. And when you realize like, okay, you may be in this, living large type of world, but you're miserable. So it's like, what if, the solution is to pare down? Maybe it is to get a smaller house or to budget more, but actually be happy and wake up and like what you're doing. So it's definitely something I think to consider. So what do you coach clients on? Like, what do your clients typically look like?
Yeah. So my focus right now is I work with moms who have lost themselves in mothering for some reason. It's really funny with coaches because we so often coach people on our own journey, right? So this is very much about my own life. But what I realized when, I was working with several different people on several different topics, and the ones that I was loving working with the most all fit in the same bucket. So now that's where I focus. And it's women who have often gone through some kind of crisis or big change in their life that they had to deal with. So they just had to like buckle down and do the thing, an illness or a child's illness or, someone in their family lost a job, something like that. Or they just had to focus. And then they get to the point where it's no longer a crisis. It's now sort of being dealt with. And they realize that they don't even know who they are anymore. And that their life is practically intolerable.
Right.
Because of that, they don't know who they are. They don't know what they want. They feel like they're just serving everybody else's needs. And it's awful. One of my clients described it as smiling on the outside and screaming on the inside.
Right.
I work with women who are in that situation and help them figure out who they are again, find themselves again underneath all that, and start to get themselves back out into the world, figure out their needs and their desires and just bring that back to life. And what that leads to is so amazing because it leads to them being far better parents. It leads to them being better partners, happier marriages. It leads to, I have one client who's a widow. And when we first started working together, she was like, I'm never going to marry again. And now she's happily dating. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And they just feel like their life is more in their control rather than just kind of like spinning all the time where they're just trying to catch up. Like they feel on top of it, So that's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah.
And I just feel like there are so many unhappy moms out there for so many reasons. And I feel like this is now my mission. Like this is where my activism energy came in. Like I want less unhappy moms.
Yeah.
I want us to be happy and engaged in our lives.
I hear you. I'm very big on that as well. I think we have these like impossible standards with Instagram and Pinterest of like the type of mom you have to be. And then on top of that, like the other messages of like having to build an empire and having to be this businesswoman and all this stuff. And there's just so many competing things that make it almost impossible to ever, quote unquote, succeed. It's like you're kind of set up to fail. So I love that. Is there any like advice that you have for a mom that might be feeling like that? Like a couple of steps, that they can maybe take to really figure out what it is they want or who they are?
Yeah, there's a few things you can do that give you clarity pretty quickly. One, one that's really quick and easy is to get off social media. That is such a trigger for us. So if you're someone who spends a lot of time on social media, which many of us do, and you feel like when you put the phone down, when you close the screen, you feel worse about yourself than when you started, take a break. And it doesn't have to be for very long, just a day or two, and just get like some breath back, like figure out. It becomes very apparent when you go back into social media, you'll be like the one that hits you in the face. You'll be like, oh, that's the one. I don't want to follow that one anymore.
Right.
So just get some clarity. That's a really good place to start. I also like to suggest that you think about things that you did when you were a kid. So what were those things that you did when you were a child that you just loved, or that you lost track of time when you were doing, when you were, maybe not when you were a kid, but even when you were a teenager or in college? Just what's that stuff that like really made you feel joyful? And is that showing up in your life right now? Are you doing any of those things, or are you doing anything like those things? So those are two really good places to start. And I do have a workbook that people can get if they sign up for my mailing list. And I'll have a page on my site specifically for your listeners. So if they go to nurturedmama.net/quitter, they can download that workbook. And that has a lot of these kinds of exercises in it.
Wonderful.
So if you guys are listening and you're like, I want to do some of that, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will link to that in the show notes for sure for anyone that wants to get that workbook. I'm sure it is super helpful. And how can people find you if they do want to work with you or kind of go further down this path?
Yeah. So you can find me at nurturedmama.net, and you can find a bunch of blog posts there. You can get on my mailing list and get that workbook. You can find my podcast. I'm also a podcaster, and my show is called Nurturing Habit. And I talk a lot about the ways that we can care for ourselves to make ourselves happier moms. It's a lot of the topics that I go through there. Those are the places you can find me.
Well, that's great.
And I love when people reach out. I'm also on Instagram. I love being on Instagram. So that's a great place to reach out if you just want to say hi or.
And what's your handle on Instagram? Is it Nurtured Mama?
Yeah, it's Nurtured Mama on Instagram.
Well, I will link to all those in case people can't write it down. So you heard her. Reach out. Let her know what you thought of the episode. Let me know. Jody, this has been so helpful. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you. I love this conversation.
I love that conversation with Donia. I think it illuminated a lot of issues that we all face. Here are my 3 takeaways. It's okay to try something else and realize even that's not right for you. Like, this is all a continuous journey. We put so much emphasis of figuring out exactly what we need to be doing. And the only way to do that is to try a bunch of things, and some of them won't work out. 2, we all have imposter syndrome. I honestly don't know how many times to say this, but the sooner you realize that and accept it, the easier it is to move on, because you realize like it's your brain tricking you. Everyone feels like that. And 3, figure out what you want your life to look like and reverse engineer that. I think a lot of times we worry so much about money or what we're supposed to do or how much we're supposed to work. And I loved what about her story is that she wanted, spend a lot of time with her daughter. And so she created her business to match what she wants. She could have more clients, she could make more money, but she's focusing on doing it the way that she wants her life to reflect. And I think we would all do well to do the same in our lives. I hope you liked that episode, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening. I can't tell you how much it means to me. If you liked the podcast, please rate and review us on iTunes. It'll help other people find the show. If you want to connect or reach out, follow along on Instagram and Facebook at Lessons from a Quitter, and on Twitter at Quitter Podcast. I would love to hear from you guys, and I'll see you on the next episode.